Now, I want you to remember something when you're reading this text. Esther, Esther is maybe early 20s, maybe early 20s, more than likely probably a late teenager at this time. So you have this young woman. You have this young woman that is now being asked to go before the king and plead for an entire people. That's what he wants her to do. Now let me just tell you real quickly before we get to Esther's response. Esther's going to come, and just like we would, she's going to start out by saying, no, I'm saving my own neck. I'm looking out for my own skin. In fact, let's look at it here. When you come in here, we're going to start in verse 9. So Hatak returned and told Esther the words of Mordecai. Then Esther spoke to Hatak and gave him a command to Mordecai. And the king's servants and the people of the king's provinces know that any man or woman who goes into the inner court of the king who has not been called, he has but one law: put all to death except the one whom the king holds out the golden scepter. She comes to Mordecai. Mordecai, there's the law of the Mede and Persians. You just can't go in and see Xerxes. It just don't work that way. You got to be summoned. If you just show up, you could die. Unless he gives you the hands out the golden scepter that shows you're safe. Now Mordecai would know this law. He would know this law. He was a judge. He would know this law. He's asking Esther to take her life into her hands because she hasn't been summoned. It don't matter if she was queen or not, and I'll get to that here in a minute. But he's asking her to take her life into her hands here because if you're not summoned, you could die. In fact, Josephus says Xerxes had men with axes in their hands standing around the throne that in order to punish those that disobeyed this law. Mordecai's coming in and he's telling Esther, you go plead before your people for the king. And Esther's like, whoa, I haven't been summoned. Do you know what you know what you're asking, Mordecai? Do you know what you're wanting me to do? You're wanting to risk my life, Mordecai. Do you realize what you're asking of me? And then look what she says. She comes around and says this. She says, look, I myself have not been called to go into the king these 30 days. She says, Mordecai, I haven't seen my husband in a month. Mordecai, I haven't seen my husband in 30 days. He's seeing, listen, do you know why some people say that this law is in effect? Because that way the queen couldn't just walk in and catch the king and his concubines. She's telling Mordecai, I might have fallen out of the favor with the king. He is seeing other women here. He is not being single here. He is seeing his concubine. I might have fallen out of favor here. I might not be. Don't you remember what happened to Vashti? I mean, he got rid of her just like that. That could happen to me, Mordecai, if I show up. He may see me, kill me, find a new queen. Now, I just want to tell you something, Mordecai. I haven't seen him for 30 days. I haven't seen my husband. What you want me to know, I can't do. I just can't do. Now, here's the thing. In Esther chapter 2, we are told that Esther has obeyed the commands of Mordecai as when she was brought up by him. Mordecai is used to being obeyed by Esther. Can you imagine Mordecai's reaction when he heard this? Esther saying, I don't think so, Mordecai. I don't believe so. I don't think I can. I can't do it, Mordecai. I'm looking out for myself. Can you imagine his reaction? Now look in verse 12 and 13. So they told Mordecai Esther's words. So they go back. I mean, you just have this back and forth, back and forth, back and forth. And Mordecai told them to answer Esther, do not think in your heart that you will escape in the king's palace any more than all the Jews. Now, I want you to notice something. Do you see in verse 12, so they, and in verse 13 it says Mordecai told them. You see the they and them? What you're going to see in this they and them, these people by now would have known Esther's secret. they would have known Esther's a Jew. In fact, they're fixing to basically be told it, because Mordecai's going to say, don't you think in your heart that you won't escape the king's palace any more than it? Just because you're a Jew and living in the palace, don't think, Esther, you're going to escape this. So they would know, that she's a Jew. Her secret is out. Now, in verse 13, Mordecai, after hearing Esther say that this could kill me, Mordecai, I haven't seen my husband in 30 days. Mordecai, I've probably fallen out of favor with him. Mordecai, I don't think I can do this. Guess what Mordecai does? Mordecai turns up the heat a little bit in verse 13. Because in verse 13, he says, do you not think in your heart that you will escape in the king's palace any more than all the other Jews? He comes and he says, Esther, I'm not listening to her excuses. Now look, here, this is amazing, because here's a guy that was so worried about Esther. In chapter 2, verses 11, he paced in front of the court of the women, in the women's quarters, I should say, to learn the welfare of Esther. He just paced back and forth, worried about Esther, worried about Esther, worried about Esther, worried about Esther. And now he wants her to go before the king without being summoned, which could mean, depending on the king's mood, death. I mean, he got rid of Vashti for not showing up when he asked. I just wonder how many people that he's put to death for this law, that what Mordecai's wanting Esther to do. So Mordecai, let me just tell you this about Mordecai in these next couple of verses. Mordecai comes so close. He comes really close here. He almost sounds like a prophet. He comes and he says, Esther, don't think you're going to escape this edict. Esther, listen, just because you're queen, that don't mean you're going to escape this edict. Esther, just because you're living in a palace, Esther, that don't mean that you're going to escape this edict. Esther, because of all this edict will kill you too. Esther, don't think you'll be safe just because you're queen. Which implies that Mordecai was thinking, Esther, from her reply, says, hey, I'm the queen. I'm going to be safe. I can't do this. I haven't seen my husband. I'm stuck here in the queen's quarters. You know the law. I can't do this. He's like, you're not going to be safe. I've spilt the beans. They know you're a Jew now. Don't think for 1 second, Esther, that you're safe in this palace at all. Now, let me tell you, once we get in this, Mordecai sounds so close to a prophet. He is almost going to say God and His sovereignty. He almost says it. I mean, he's this close to saying it. Look in verse 14. For if you remain completely silent at this time, relief and deliverance will arise for the Jews from another place. I'm telling you, he could pass for Isaiah, Daniel, Ezekiel, Jeremiah. I mean, he is sounding so close, like a prophet here. He comes and he says, if you remain completely silent this time, relief and deliverance will arise from the Jews from another place. But you and your father's house will perish. Yet who knows whether you have come to the kingdom for such a time as this? I mean, he really sounds like a prophet here. Now let me tell you what he just basically says. He says, Esther, God has many ways to carry out His will. He has many ways. Do you see? That's what he's saying right there. He says, listen, Esther, if you don't do this, Esther, if you don't do this, do you not think God will arise and deliver the Jews from another place? He's saying, Esther, God has many ways to carry out His will. Many ways. If you don't do nothing, Esther, your father's house is going to be destroyed. Now look, he says, Esther, how do you know God hasn't put you here at this exact time in this exact place, Esther, to accomplish His will? Now, that's what I wish he said. He don't, but he comes that close. That's what I wish he would have said, but he don't. He comes that close, though. Now, Esther has a choice to make. She has a choice to make. She can either go and think that because she is queen and because of her royalty in the palace that she'll be safe, or she can do something. She has a choice to make. Know this, God will accomplish His will with or without you. Look what Mordecai says. Do not think in your heart that you will escape the king's palace any more than any other Jews. For if you remain completely silent this time, relief and deliverance will arise for the Jews from another place. Folks, listen, this is true with us. When we reject the will of God, God don't need Matt Doty. God don't need Macedonia Baptist Church. God don't need any of these things to accomplish His will. He can come, if we say, no, God, I'm not going to do it, He can go and say, okay, I'll go to the church down the road. I'll go to this person. Let me tell you what, God don't need us to accomplish His will. He can accomplish His will with or without us. Now look, when we reject God's will, we miss so many blessings if we don't do it. Because God's going to accomplish it anyway, but we're going to miss the blessing. Whether it's, whatever it is. Now here's the thing. Here's the privilege. God has come to us in His goodness, and He says, come let me bless you. Come let me bless you. Come let me bless you. If we do according to His will, He's coming. He says, let me bless you. His will is going to be accomplished anyway. That is what Mordecai is telling Esther. If you don't do it, Esther, he's going to do something to accomplish this anyway. It's the same thing with us. We miss the blessing. That's the privilege. It's like God saying, come, let me bless you. Now let me get on to Esther. Look in verse 15. Look at the courage of this woman, Esther. Then Esther told them to reply to Mordecai, go gather all the Jews who are present in Shushan and fast for me. Neither eat nor drink for 3 days, night or day. My maids and I will fast likewise, and so I will go to the king, which is against the law, and if I perish, I perish. What a woman. And Mordecai went on his way and did according to all that Esther commanded him. Esther has taken orders from Mordecai all her life. Now she gives orders to Mordecai to carry one out. Vashti, Mordecai, and now Esther are facing life-threatening situations. She tells Mordecai, okay, here we go. Let's do it. Let's do it. You go gather all the Jews in the capital city here. You fast for me. Neither eat nor drink for 3 days, night or day. My maids and I, we're going to fast likewise. And then I'll go to the king. I'll do it. I'll go. What courage. What courage from this young woman who just a couple of verses ago really was looking after her own neck. And she says, it's against the law, and if I perish, I perish. What courage from this woman. What a woman. It reminds me, let me just tell you this. It reminds me of this. It reminds me of the missionary that has been called to the mission field that goes somewhere that we can't talk about. And this missionary, knowing that he's in the will of God, says, if I perish, I perish. What courage that those guys have that go out and they know they're in the will of God, and they know they're in countries that they could be killed for sharing the gospel. And they say, if I perish, I perish. Just like Esther here. Josephus, the Jewish historian, says this. Now, this is not in your scripture. This is from Josephus. Josephus says, after Esther told him this, Esther took off her queenly robes, her veil. She put on sackcloth and ashes, and she did exactly what the Jews did in verse 3. She laid in sackcloth and ashes, just like the Jews did. And she prayed. She prayed. And in her prayer, she asked God to help her be persuasive with her words after these 3 days with the king. She asked God to help her countenance, to help her beauty show and help her beauty persuade the king that he might change the decision that he's made. She prays that both her beauty and her words might succeed. Here's Esther, a young woman showing courage in the face of a life-threatening situation. Well, that's all the time I've got. Thank you for being here. We look forward to with you being next week. Thank you, and God bless.